Good evening, people. Yeah, as we are dealing with the Stopping English literature, we just went through the Jacobean age and we were talking about the realm of the King James First, who was the James Fourth of the Scotland and became the King of the England. In our last lecture, we had started with the metaphysical school of poetry, which deals with the means beyond the horizon kind of poetry. Means we can see that uh, kind of poetry which we can't get the answer through the science. Okay, so when we talk about the metaphysical poetry, it's beyond our imagination. Okay, or something supernatural, something which man can't handle. These kind of poetry we can find with as we talked about the metaphysical school of poetry. It rather beneficial for us to just go and have a look on the writings of these metaphysical poets. So as we just see this thing, that is metaphysical poetry is deals with the question that can't be explained or answered by the science, and the same thing we can find in the poetry of the John Donne, which we have seen in our last lecture. As we go forward and try to uh, talk about the metaphysical school of poetry and the name John Donne, sorry, there is very confusion between the John Dryden and John Donne, but yeah, we are focusing on the John Donne right now. So, the John Donne was born and raised as a Catholic, and many relatives exiled or executed. He was the person who have given his interpretation of poetry in the different sense, which we can consider as the metaphysical poetry. As we just try to find out the metaphysics and the definition of the metaphysics, you people must have an idea that is what is metaphysics is. So metaphysics is a traditional method of arguing popularized by a group of philosophers called the scholastics. So uh, this is a kind of argument, but not a regular kind of the argument. Here we can find a new kind of argument where different concepts or different disputes are come together in the different way, or the writers, or let's say the one who want to explain the situation, he's the person who what we can call it, mm, who present his issue in a different way. So as we move forward and see, this would be the one of the important part of literature in the early 17th century. In our last lecture we had talked about the writings of the John Donne, but even today we'll look into it in a different manner. Sorry for the interruption. Yeah. So we were talking about the John Donne. Born and raised a Catholic, many relatives exiled or executed, but we can find this pain, this differentness he described through his poetry, and that's why John Donne was considered as the one of the distinguished poet of uh, this stuff. I would like to add some more points about the John Donne, and then we'll move towards the some other writers who belong to the uh, metaphysical school of poetry. Yeah, as we just move forward and trying to find out the term metaphysical poetry. The metaphysical, this term metaphysical implies a process of dry reasoning. What is dry reasoning? A speculation about the nature of universe and the problems of life and death. So it's in a bit major sense we can say. Metaphysical poetry is direct sensuous apprehension of thought or recreation of thought into feeling. This is very important line. That is metaphysical poetry is direct sensuous apprehension. Direct sensuous apprehension of thought or recreation of thought into feeling. Recreation of thought into feeling. Dante's view about the metaphysical school of poetry is a metaphysical poetry. He says, thoughts transmitted into the imagery of dreams. Reason not important that much. The world they create become more important to them. Therefore, Donne says in the Good Morrow, one of the poem of John Donne, the Good Morrow. We had talked about the features, so I don't want to go again. These are types and themes. Even the metaphysical school of poetry, it was began early in the Jacobean age, in the last age of the Shakespeare. John Donne and his followers wrote metaphysical poetry in 17th century, and this tradition of the 17th century was revived in England and America in 20th century. So it was started in 17th century, and then we can find it was again revived in 20th century. These are the different critics views. We already had talked about it. Yeah, these are the major metaphysical poets. John Donne and the other one. We'll talk about them one by one very soon. We already had talked about the John Donne. This is the John Donne as a metaphysical poet. His time frame 1537 to 1631. This was his time frame. Uh, he was one of the main craftsmen of the metaphysical school of poetry. As I told you, he was the leader and founder of the metaphysical school of poetry. His poetry is intellectual in nature and it's replicate with the witty concepts. Okay. Full of imagery, dramatic elements, directness of speech, and harsh rhythm. These are the some important features of his poetry. His best known works are The Progress of the Soul and Anatomy of World and Elegy and Epithalamium. We already had discussed these points. Yeah, Donne's poetry is characterized by intellect in which emotions are fused. Donne passionately feels a thought and experiences it intensely. That's why T.S. Eliot says, a thought to Donne was an experience. It modified his sensibility. So he's just talking about the unification of sensibility. Who T.S. Eliot talks about the unification of sensibility while talking about the John Donne's poetry, metaphysical school of poetry. What he says that unification of sensibility is where mind goes with the heart and expression is associated with the emotion. So whatever you are expressing this thing when come to the emotion, it's called as a unification of sensibility according to the T.S. Eliot. When he just talks about the John Donne and his poetry, he reflects this thought through his working or through his work. And the same thing he just talking over here, that is the unification of mind with the heart. Whatever goes in your mind, it must be uh, what we can say feel by your heart, and when this feeling come into the reality, this is called as a unification of sensibility. Unification of sensibility. So that's why a thought to done was an experience, it modified his sensibility. It was said in 1921. Metaphysical poetry is a blend of passion and thought. Yeasley thinks that passionate thinking is the chief mark of the metaphysical poetry. There is an intellectual analysis of emotion in Donne's poetry, though every lyric arises out of some emotional situation. The emotion is not merely expressed, rather it is analyzed. So again, the emotion and expression. He's just talking about these two things, emotion with expression. And the same thing we can find in Donne's poem, that is a valediction, Forbidden Mourning. He proves that lovers need not mourn at parting. For instance, what he says, so let us melt and make no noise. So let us melt and make no noise. No tear flood, nor sigh tempest move. Where means it were profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Laity means who unbound of what is happening. So he's just talking about the separation about the lovers, but still he says that this separation is not separation, but it's a kind of new beginning. Like, so let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods, nor sigh tempest more. Okay, it were profanation of our joys to tell us later our love. Yeah, the same thing. The major quality of metaphysical poetry is combination of thought and feeling. Very important point. Huh? Combination, combination of thought and combination of thought and feeling. And Donne is the master of presenting together different objects which have a remote similarity between them. See what John Donne had done. He used some kind of concepts in his work, like he presenting together different objects which have a remote similarity between them. So a different object with the remote similarity, So what John Donne has done, he present these different objects through his poetry, like presenting together different objects with the which have a remote similarity between them, and he connects the abstracts with concrete. See, words are very important. Abstracts with concrete, the remote with the near, and the physical with the commonplace. So, uh, see here we can find that he used a kind of uh, figure of speech, specifically simile, where we can find the comparison between the two objects. Like my love is like red, red roses. But here we can find that love, sorry, rose is uh, the representative of love. Okay, so here he also used some concepts, but they are very weird in in the sense like, for example, in his Valediction Forbidden Morning, he just talking about the two lovers, and he compared these two lovers with the compass. Okay, and what he says, when the one string of the compass stay firm, the other can round or round there, and a perfect circle will complete. ओके, आता आपण प्रत्येकाने कंपास बघितलाय, वापरला पण आहे सगळ्यांनी. जेव्हा आपण काढतो तेव्हा आपला जो एक असतो पाय, तो फिक्स असतो आणि दुसरा गोल रिव्हॉल्व करतो. जर का मधला फिक्स असला तर जो गोल येतो तो परफेक्ट येतो. ओके, दिस इज द थिंग. अँड जॉन्डनने काय केलं, हीच गोष्ट पकडली अँड ही कम्पेअर्ड दिस थिंग विथ द लव. Like he says, when we have two lovers and one stay firm, take the decisions, take the responsibility, so other can go around, do what would be the best for them, and then we can find a perfect goal completed. Okay, I'll uh, urge you to just go and read this poem. You will find it, how what we can say, how intellectually John Donne has compared the different objects with the love, and how he just made his point. So he connects the abstracts with concrete, the remote with the near, and the physical with the commonplace. Uh, when example, we have example here, that is in the Sunrising, one of the famous poem by uh, John Donne, where he says, a busy fool to the bus, busy and old fool to the sun. What he says in Sunrising, considered his beloved the center of the universe. Again, he considered his beloved as the center of the universe, and this feeling is conveyed by making the sun revolve round their room. What he says, shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy center is, this wall thy sphere. Thy walls there, uh, this wall thy sphere. प्लीज तुम्ही वाचा. खूप म्हणजे खूप इंटरेस्टिंग आहे, आणि एक खूप वेगळ्या काइंड ऑफ वेगळा पॉइंट ऑफ व्ह्यू मांडलाय जॉन डनने. म्हणजे एखादी गोष्ट आपण कुठल्या प्रकारे कशी रिप्रेझेंट करू शकतो, याला काहीच बाउंड्रीज नाहीये. ओके, देर इज अ बुक बाय अमिताव घोष, वन ऑफ द फेमस इंडियन रायटर, साहित्य अकादमी विनर. The name of the book is A Shadow Line. Okay, and actually this is, we can consider it as a partition book where we can find the um, partition of India and Bangladesh, some glimpses of India-Pakistan boundary and some glimpses of Indian Bangladesh uh, partition. Okay, so how it's deeply mm, affect some in a person's psychology. That was a thing we can find over here in shadow lines. And actually, this is a kind of question whether the boundaries are required. Actually, even though this is the totally different subject, but here we can see the John Donne has come up with such kind of expression over here. Yeah. So the second important aspects of John Donne's metaphysical poetry is emotions are shaped by logical reasoning. So according to Grierson, in metaphysical poetry, exhibited deductive reasoning carried to a high pitch. So Donne's poetry express his extensive learning. Yeah, that is another thing. We can find that these writers, like metaphysical writers, what they have done, they shown us, or they just try to show their learning, whatever they had learned, their knowledge, to their readers or the one who just studying their poetry. And they they just express his extensive learning, like he was well versed in medieval science, logic, theology, law and medicine were at his command. His mobile imagination could draw images from almost every field. So that is we can find in his poetry also. So the expressions of the poetry written by this person is totally different. And you can find how extensively he had read these different types of literature or different aspects of knowledge, like logic, theology, law and medicine, and these all things were reflected through his poetry. Not only the John Donne, but his contemporary or his followers or metaphysical poets, in their writings we can find these all subjects were introduced. Yeah. Another important aspect of his poetry, that is the Donne you often uses fantastic comparisons. I have given the example of it. The most striking and famous one used by Donne is the comparison of a man who travels and his beloved who stays at home to a pair of compasses in the poem. A Valediction, Forbidden Morning, which I have already told you, but yeah, we'll repeat it. Like he says, if they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. Thy firmness makes my circle just. Yeah, we already discussed this one, so I'm not going to deep. But just see the comparison which he had made over here. So this is, he just uses fantastic comparisons that we can find here. Uh, he used a wit a lot. Yeah. Another important aspect of his poetry, that is he used the use of colloquial speech. He use of colloquial speech is another element of Donne's metaphysical poetry. This is especially apparent in their approved, dramatic, and conversational opening many of his poems. For instance, in the poem The Canonization, he says, "For God's sake, hold thy tongue and let me love. For thy sake, for God's sake, hold thy tongue and let me love." So this is one of the example of the colloquial speech he used. Yeah, argumentative style. Metaphysical poetry is a fusion of passionate feelings and logical arguments. Yes, passionate feelings and logical arguments. Argumentative manner of speech is another element of Donne's poetry. He often tries to prove his statements through solid arguments. Following are some examples from some poems. If our two loves be one, or thou and I, love so alike that none um, just slacken, none can die. So here we can find a kind of concrete argument of what we can call it, the combination of the two. This has been taken from the Good Morrow. If yet I have not all thy love, dear, I shall never have it all. That is love's infiniteness. Sorry, lovers infiniteness. They who one another keep alive never parted be. They who one another keep alive never parted be. That is sweetest love, I do not go. Sweetest love, I do not go. That is the lines he taken from. Since thou and I sigh one another's breath. Yes, yeah. Here, this was the best example of the argumentative style uh, John Donne has used in his poetry. What he says, since thou and I sigh one another's breath, whoever sighs most is cruelest and hastest the other's death. So fine. Since thou and I sigh one another's breath, whoever sighs most is cruelest and hastest the other's death. You can find that he has used different types of language, so you might have to feel that this is a very tough kind of poetry, but no, it's not. दुरून डोंगर साजरे म्हणतो तसा प्रकार आहे की दिसतं सण असतं म्हणून जग फसतं हा प्रकार इथं होतो. गो अँड जस्ट ट्राय टू रीड इट. खूप सोपी आहे समजायला पण आणि कळायला पण सोपी आहे, फक्त शब्द थोडे वेगळे वापरले जॉन्डनने, पण येस यू विल लव दिस काइंड ऑफ. So another example of the argumentative style we can find over here, and it is from a valediction of weeping. Hmm. Love me that I may die and gentle way. Hate me because thy love is too great for me. To let me live, oh love, and hate me too. This is from a prohibition. Yeah. Another feature of his poetry, not only John Donne's poetry, but the feature we're talking about the metaphysical school of poetry. But I am giving you the examples of the John Donne because he was the main promoter, or let's say the main uh, one who just major exponent of this kind of poetry. That's why I'm just giving you his examples. Others like George Herbert, Thomas Cara, they also have written the poetry, and yeah, Abraham Cole, one of the example will We'll talk about him, but I'm just giving his examples so you can understand it properly, and you may have a good kind of mm, not a good kind of clear. Let me rephrase it. So I'm just giving these examples because for your betterment of your experience and for the betterment of your लर्निंग स्पेसिफिकली की तुम्हाला ते चांगल्या प्रकारे समजावं याच्यासाठी फॉर युअर बेटर अंडरस्टँडिंग आय एम युझिंग on the first hand I'm just talking about mm, its specification or its we can say features and explaining it through the poems of the John Donne himself. So paradoxes. Online people next time चला hello नमस्ते एवढं सांगा चॅट बॉक्स मध्ये चॅट करू कळवा फक्त कळतंय समजतंय Okay, so we're talking about the paradoxes he used in his poetry. Yesterday on the day before yesterday, okay. So I have told you that if you just want to know the not know understand the metaphysical school of poetry, you must have an idea about the figure of speech. Yeah, in this regard, when we talk about the figure of speeches, these people are very intelligent. We can find uh, their intellect was described through the poetry, through the writing. So, in that sense, I would just want to tell you that go and have a look into this all stuff. So, Donne's poetry is replete with paradoxes and strange contradictions. He is a great love poet. Fine. Sometimes he is too blunt that he opposes childish and starts blaming and even cursing his beloved. So, this is one of the specialty of his writing. And on other hand, in flattery, he left Petrarch behind. So, that is another thing. It is because Donne is so passionate and whatever he thinks, he expresses and it affects. Example of paradox in New York. In his song Go and Catch a Falling Star, Donne claims that and where nowhere lives a woman true and fair. Contradictory to this, he asserts in The Sunrising said, she is all state and all princess I, nothing else is. See the contradiction he used here. Similarity in his song Sweetest Love I Do Not Go, Donne says that art the best of me, that art of the best of me. In the reliquy, Donne says all measures and all languages I should pass. Should I tell what a miracle she was? The contradiction. So affection and hyperbolic expression. Affection and hyperbolic expression is another characteristic of metaphysical poetry. It is often hard to find natural grace in metaphysical writing, abounding in artificiality of thought and hyperbolic expression. Artificiality of thought and hyperbolic expression. The writer seemed to say something unexpected and surprising what they wanted to supply. They endeavored to supply by hyperbole. Their amplification had no limit. They left not only reasons but fancy behind them and produced combination of confused magnificence. This is about the metaphysical writer. So what they deem to say something unexpected and surprising what they wanted to sublime. They endeavored to supply by hyperbole. Their amplification had no limit. They left not only reason but fancy behind them and produced combination of confused magnificence. the lines of these two. A valediction, forbidden mourning. What he says are two souls, therefore, which are one. Thou I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to ivory thinness beat. Yeah, exaggeration is another important element of Donne's poetry. This exaggeration appears to be cruel in its high spiritedness. He says, go and catch a falling star, get with child a mandrake root. Style. The last and most important feature of Donne's metaphysical poetry is its language of style. So, Donne used simple and common language. Legius says that he did not feel any necessity of mentioning gods and goddesses in his poetry. He rejected all the conventional and traditional poetic devices. But even though he didn't use these poetic devices, we can find he had made the base kind of poetry through his writing. On the whole, simple words are used unexpectedly. Though diction is simple, yet words are combined in unexpected way, and the strange compounds are formed. Are formed. Sorry. So we can find a bit grammar in his poetry also, but the use of words and the common language, simple and common language he used in his poetry, it's a different level of the using words or the melding words in bending and mending words in the different style. Yeah, so to the sum of, we can say Donne's unconventional approach to love and divine poetry. Yeah, this is our very important one. Donne's unconventional approach to love and divine poetry and divine poetry. His combination of thought and feeling, combination of thought and feeling, and harsh versification make him a metaphysical poet. Harsh versification, harsh versification, combination of thought and feeling. This is the thing which makes him metaphysical poet. The lyrics of the metaphysical poems are fantastic and spectacular. According to AC Word, we can find the metaphysical style is a combination of two elements: the fantastic form and style, and the incongruous in matter and manner. And these all things we can find in John Donne. Hope you catched it. There is no need to go in the deep, in the too deep. We can look these features and use it in the metaphysical field. Yeah, a metaphysical school of poetry. So the first one is George Herbert. His time frame is 1593 to 1633. Herbert's well-known works are The Temple, a collection of religious poems, and A Priest to the Temple. The Temple and A Priest to the Temple. A Priest to the Temple is a prose tract that offers practical wisdom to clergy. Priest to the Temple is a prose tract that offers practical wisdom to clergy. The Temple, it consists of 150 poems in conversational style. Okay, it's a kind of conversation style, but they were 150 in number. Easterwing's example of emblem poetry. So one of his poem, that is Easterwing, is example of emblem poetry. So what is emblem poetry? So emblem poetry is arranging lines in structured way. Arranging lines in structured way. He was considered to be the most important British devotional lyricist of his time. So, three important things about the poetry of George Herbert. First of all, it was written in conversational style. Emblem poetry. Emblem poetry is arranging lines in structured way. And the third very important feature, that is, he was considered as the most important British devotional lyricist of his time. Devotional lyricist of his time. So, lyrics are very important. The next person, Richard Crashaw. Richard Crashaw, when you talk about Richard Crashaw, his major poetry appeared in Step to the Temple in 1646. Step to the Temple in 1646. The title indicates Crashaw's debt to George Herbert. Crashaw's debt to George Herbert. So this is a kind of hierarchy that John Donne, so Robert Crashaw, George Herbert indebted to the John Donne, and Richard Crashaw indebted to the George Herbert for his poetry. So we can find the hierarchy. So the title indicates Crashaw's debt to George Herbert, specifically Step to the Temple. Wishes to his supposed mistress was one of the fabulous lyrics written by Richard Crashaw. Here say there is the one line about the neither the most important nor the least distinguished. Neither the most important nor the least distinguished kind of poetry. Crashaw's style reflected a 17th century movement called Marianism or Secentismo. Marianism or Secentismo. This movement was popularized by the Italian poet Giambattista Marino. Giambattista Marino. It was a reaction against classism marked by extravagant metaphors, hyperbole, fantastic wordplay, and original myths, all written with great sonority and sensuality, and with the aim to startle. Have used it, see it in your own way. So Crashaw's style reflects a 17th century movement called Marianism. Go and have a look. What is Marianism? Yeah, kind of religious kind of movement, but it will give you the different aspects of the contemporary poetry. It was a reaction against classism, marked by extravagant metaphors, hyperbole, fantastic wordplay, and original myths. How the myths are original? All written with great sonority and sensuality, and with the aim to startle. The next person we have in this queue, that is Henry Vaughan. Henry Vaughan, his time from 1621 to 1695. His pseudonym was Telluride. Actually, he was the son of Thomas Vaughan and Dennis. Henry Vaughan was born in Newton upon Earth in Breconshire, Wales in 1620. Metaphysical poet with romantic spirit. This is his metaphysical poet with romantic spirit. This is his introduction. Metaphysical poet with romantic spirit. Later in his life, Vaughan began to practice medicine, so he was a good doctor too. In 1946, Vaughan poems with the 10th satire of juvenile English was published, followed by the second volume in 1644. In 1650, his collection of religious poems, Salix Salentilis, meaning the fiery flint or the flashing flint, was published. In the preface to his volume, Vaughan referred to George Herbert as the blessed man whose holy life and works gained many pious converts. So we can find a kind of new kind of controversy over here, or the poetry written by this writer. We can find the aim behind it. So inspired Wordsworth with, and was inspired by George Herbert. Quotation of Bishop Strange: as a divine Vaughan may be inferior to Herbert, but as a poet he is certainly superior. So superiority and inferiority between the poets we can find here in these two people's writing. Yeah, another famous exponent of this kind of poetry, Andrew Marvell, 1621 to 1678 time frame. His poem Upon Appleton House to My Lord Fairfax was the country house poem in manner of Johnson's The Pensionist. Marvell was also the well-known politician. He held office in Cromwell's government and represented Hull to Parliament during Restoration. We'll come to this point later. He also paid tribute to Cromwell in his famous ode, an Horatian ode upon Cromwell written from Ireland. But Andrew Marvell is the person who is famous for his marvelous kind of poetry to his poems. You might have studied this one in his in your graduation or PG. We can find his two poems. One of the famous poem of the metaphysical poetry. Had we but word enough and time, O lady, these coins were no crime. My vegetable love should grow. My vegetable love should grow. At my back, I always hear time's wings chariot hurrying near. This is one of the quotations from this poem also. But there is a kind of criticism also you can find about him. That Richard Noggin's reply to Marvel's abusive, and what he says, chemistry is nothing but it's a sophomoric love. So what is sophomoric love? That is immature love. A.D. Hopes, one of the Australian writer, written book of answers to Andrew Marvel. Andrew Marvel's poetry given us the insight of the well-heard and well exposuric poetry. We can find that he was the person who come up with the different kind of imageries or different kind of comparison. Uh, but still, uh, as it is not in not talk about this poetry was nature. It was represented of love or immature love. But fine, it's okay. It will happen. The whole cult of metaphysical poetry was blamed for these kind of things that they were called as an immature writer. But as we just go and try to learn, try to study and understand their poetry, we can find that they just come up with their argument. How we have to take, how we have to take it. It's our perspective. Hope you just get my point. The next one we have, next and the last one of the metaphysical poetry is Abraham Cole. Abraham Cole's time frame 1818 to 1667. Poet and essayist Abraham Cole was born in London in 1618. Called Last of the Metaphysical. Okay. Cole first published his volume of verse, that is Poetical Blossoms, in 1633, which appeared when he was only 50. His other works include the poetic collection The Mistress and Unfinished Epic Davidias and the stage comedy The Guardian. He used Pindaric odes with different rhymes and themes. What shall I do to be forever known and make the coming age of my own? He also wrote a pamphlet on the advancement of experimental philosophy. See, he also wrote a pamphlet on the advancement of experimental philosophy. So he not only the exponent of the poetry, but he also um, realm into the experimental philosophy. So about the metaphysical of poetry. So we have to show you one poem which is considered the best example of the metaphysical school of poetry after John Donne. So his poemist. Had we but word enough and time, had we but word enough and time, it's finite. this finest lady wear no prime. This finest lady wear no prime. We would sit down and think which way to talk and pass a long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side, thou'dst rubies find. I by the tide of Amber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion. My vegetable love should grow faster than empires and more slow. Faster than empire, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back, I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. Time's chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound. My echoing song then warmth shall dry, that long preserved virginity, that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turns to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's fine and private place, but none, I think, do their embrace. Now therefore, while the youthful hue sight on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fire, now let us sport us while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey, rather at one our time devour than languish in slow chapter power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into the into the ball, into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. So, this is a different type of poetry which these people had done. So, we had completed our metaphysical poetry, and along with metaphysical poetry, you people, you must have an idea that we had done the Jacobean age. In our next lecture, that is tomorrow, we'll talk about the Cavalier, the Caroline age, the Cavalier poetry and all stuff. We'll start with the background to the Caroline age, and then we move forward to the poetry, drama, and the other all literature written in the Caroline age. Thank you for your patience. Goodbye. Good night.